the Foodshed Investors, and Judith McGeary from FARFA, the Farm and Ranch Freedom Alliance. So I'm going to hand it over to Carolina to get started with our discussion tonight and presentation.
Yeah, hey, thanks so much for being here, everyone. My name is Carolina, and I am really excited to say that I am now the former president of the Central Texas Young Farmers Coalition, which is it's very exciting to be handing that off. I am a food systems practitioner. I've been working in the food system for the whole entirety of my career. So this includes food service, farming, food access, community engagement, public policy, and a bunch more. I'm currently working at the National Young Farmers Coalition. I also like to throw pottery, and I raise a small herd of beef cattle at my partner's vegetable farm in Bastrop, just east of Austin. I'm going to provide an introduction to the relief work that we did, how we organized, what we accomplished, and what we learned. I'm probably also going to get up my soapbox a little bit here and there. I'll try to keep that to a minimum, but no promises. I really look forward to answering some questions and expanding on ideas that y'all might have and want some more information on, but I'm going to go ahead and dive right in. So just to give a brief overview, I was part of a collective of organizations that pulled together to launch what we very creatively called the Texas Farmer Winter Storm Relief Fund. And these were agencies and nonprofit organizations that came together in response to the impact of Winter Storm Uri in February of 2021, just earlier this year. So the week that the storm was coming in, we were, all of the farmers I know were busy getting hay and covering crops and filling propane tanks for greenhouses. But the day that the temperature started to drop and the precipitation started, it was like every day was starting to get a little bit more and more serious. And when the rolling blackout started and the temperature stayed frighteningly low, and then we started seeing other structural fallout like pipes bursting, we knew that, I started to get the sense that something really bad was going to happen. And so I was in my last semester of graduate school. Thankfully, classes had been canceled that week. And watching the weather forecast in the news, I began to reach out to organizations that had historically provided disaster relief to farmers and ranchers. So the Texas Farmers Market was one of them. Through that conversation, it sort of snowballed, no pun intended. And over the course of less than a week, we had a steering committee of 8 different kinds of entities that had formed, representing various geographic regions and types of agriculturalists here in Texas. So we had the Dallas area, Central Texas, East Texas, the Gulf Coast, and the Valley, as well as some support from West Texas. And so part of the reason why we were able to pull this group together so quickly was that there were already existing connections in place. So in other words, there was a lot of trust there to build off of, and we were able to move pretty quickly, all things considered. Remember, this was not a network that had existed previously, so this was all brand new stuff, in this big statewide sort of way. So we were very clear about what we needed to accomplish, which was raise money and get it out to farmers. And we understood that we might need to make some tough choices, but that we would work together and really just make the sacrifices we need to, but still really prioritize the relationships and the work. In order to focus on equity, we felt it was really important not only that we work with organizations that represent different kinds of farming communities, but also that we distribute the resources that we have the ability to gather here in Central Texas and distribute it all over Texas. So in order to reach Black, Latino, and other kinds of underserved farmers and ranchers, it was really important that we worked with, so for example, Phil Wade at the Texas Small Farmers and Ranchers, community-based organization, Marisol Cervantes, a student down at the University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley. And then we, like I mentioned, we also had support from organizations that were not part of the steering committee, but that were able to provide support, including having our application translated by Julieta from La Semilla Food Center in the El Paso region. So from here, our work really could be categorized in two ways. One was the fundraising and one was the granting. The fundraising was primarily created around a model of a GoFundMe. And so we had set a goal of $50,000 based on previous experiences that Judith and Sue Beckwith had raising funds for disaster relief, and Susie Marshall. And we felt it was an ambitious goal, but it felt important. And so we went ahead and we launched it on February 17th. On February 25th, we had exceeded that goal. So it was just about a week into it and we had exceeded our goal. In addition to individual donations, we were also able to receive generous donations from national and local companies, as well as foundations. So the post on Instagram received a lot of movement, and our fundraiser was on the front page of the GoFundMe, which was really, really awesome. Not to name drop, but Anthony from Queer Eye shared it in his stories. So that was pretty cool. And our first big donation was from Chipotle here in Texas. And so they have an existing relationship with the National Young Farmers Coalition, the parent organization for our Central Texas chapter. And so they had reached out and asked us to share a little bit about what we were working on. So I did, and they donated $50,000. And if you want to watch me cry, first get me really stressed out and then offer me $50,000. It'll get you there immediately. The second big donation was from Tractor Supply Company, who were contacted by Texas Center for Local Food, by Katie, who works there. And they also donated $50,000. So that was, I won't start crying again because I got all my tears out back in February and March, but just understand that it was a lot for us. And we also had food and farming related businesses here in town fundraising on our behalf. So that included farmhouse delivery as well as barley swine. And so the total amount that we were able to fundraise was over $205,000, which is more than 4 times our goal. Turns out that was the easy part. We thought raising $50,000 would be hard. Nope, turns out that was just make an ask and people rallied. And I really can't overstate the amount of support that we felt, not just here in Texas, but really all over the country. I mean, we had folks donating from all over the country, and it was a really powerful testament to the fact that people do really value the work that farmers do and the food that we grow and produce and raise. So, granting. So Susie Marshall from Grow North, Texas, proposed a process for how we could go and actually grant the folks who had applied. But before that, we had to create an application. So we wanted to really make sure that we were not burdening farmers too much by making anything super complicated and lengthy. We knew that people were in crisis and we needed to get money out to them as quickly as possible. And we also needed to make sure that we were in compliance with IRS tax codes, since we were using the Texas Organic Farmer and Gardener Association bank account. So they were one of the 8 partners, and they were our bank, so to speak. And Frankie Baines did a lot of work on that. And so this meant that we had, again, we were able to turn to applications that had previously been put into place by Judith and by Sue and by Susie. And so we were able to build off that and really make it specific to this group, and to also build in a couple of a little bit more flexibility into it, again, just to make it more accessible. Then we also translated it into Spanish, which we got out pretty quickly. In addition to having it as a Google form, we also had the names and phone numbers of a couple of the steering committee members, so that folks who didn't have internet access could call us and we could fill it out for them. We also allowed people's friends or relatives or other community resources to fill it out for them. And then we also did create a PDF so that if someone wanted us to mail it to them, we could do that as well. And we didn't have anyone do that, but we just wanted to make sure that we had a number of options, both in English and in Spanish. Then when we actually started granting, we decided that it was important to take into consideration not just the acreage of production, but also demographics, damages, and other relevant information. And what we said was that we needed at least three members of the steering committee to sign off and to come to an agreement. And so this really allowed for us to be able to, again, create a structure where we could acknowledge the fact that historical racism has prevented Black farmers to be able to do agriculture as their primary source of income. And so same with Latinos, same with Indigenous farmers. And so we really wanted to make sure that we were taking that into account. So we had priority populations. And same with, the kinds of farmers who are able to access vast amount of capital are typically going to be white farmers. And so we just needed to take all these complicated factors into account. And I think we did a really good job of that. And we took notes and we were very meticulous about all of that stuff. Okay. So although the financial and structural and emotional damages caused by the storm are going to be felt in our community for years, it was really inspiring to see the response to our call for relief efforts. And before I get into the strengths and the successes, I actually really want to touch on the hard lessons that we learned, because I think it really informs us as to what we need to know to prepare for the next time. So one, the main thing was we didn't have any dedicated staff to lead the organizing work. I was volunteering my time. I was very clear from the beginning that I was just volunteering my time. And so once school started back up again, thankfully, my university was very flexible with me. They really respected the fact that I had things outside of school that were also really important. But that's not always going to be the case, right? We're not always going to have someone who's in the position financially or just with having the amount of time to be able to do that. Another challenge was that these organizations are led by many people who themselves are farmers. In fact, I would say every single organization is in some way either directly or very, very closely farming. And so that meant that we were also dealing with the impact of the storm on our own farms. We lost over $30,000 worth of product, and that's an incredibly difficult and emotional situation to be navigating while you're also trying to manage and kind of hold space for the losses that all of these other farmers are also experiencing. We had to create the process and framework and infrastructure and policies and all of that stuff while we were going along. That's really difficult to do while you're in the middle of crisis. But thankfully, we have some of those now. So for the next time, we're a little bit more ready. Another really big bottleneck for us was the IRS tax code prevented us from granting money to the farm businesses. We were limited to providing emergency cash relief to individuals and their families, as long as we had an ability to show that there was need, which we did through those applications. We would have loved to be able to give it to people to use towards rebuilding infrastructure, but we were just really hamstrung and there wasn't the time to be able to update that, unfortunately. And so that was, we had to be very clear. This was for medical, for personal, for food, for rent, whatever it was. We had big donor support. Another challenge is that big donor support from foundations could have really benefited our statewide coalition to redistribute these funds all across the state. That would have been really great, and not as much work to sort of look for these kind of smaller donations, even though, we were quite successful with that. From an administrative perspective, I wish that our response time to farmer questions had been a little bit quicker, and I take responsibility for that. There was so much going on at the time that it was hard to get back to folks as quickly. Another challenge is that we were operating outside of formal networks, which meant that we had limited resources and capacity to actually run this relief program. Another administrative process that we ran into was mailing out the checks. I won't get into the 20-minute diatribe that I could against the bank that sent us the wrong kinds of checks. I'm going to spare you that. But having checks when you send out checks is really important. And just at times, it was incredibly emotionally overwhelming to be doing this work. Again, not just navigating what we were experiencing, but also reading through the applications and seeing how close people were to some pretty serious ramifications from the storm financially. So it was a lot. But thankfully, our list of successes is longer. I mean, in a word, the response to our relief work was incredible. And I have to keep reminding myself because sometimes I just block out those like 4 months that we were really working on it really intensely. But so our successes include fundraising. Also, we had a Spanish translation early on. It was truly a group effort. And every time that I started to freak out that I was going to make the wrong decision about something, I knew that I had people to turn to with very different expertise that I could trust and that trusted me. And that was incredibly important. We had the previous disaster application as a template. We were able to offer multiple rounds of relief, which was really, really exciting and exhausting. And we were able to actually set aside some funds for seed money. We were given permission by some donors for the next disaster. So now we're not starting from zero. We actually have a little bit of a buffer. We had a vast reach geographically and racially. And a strength as well as a weakness is that we were operating outside of the formal networks, which meant that we were providing a safety net for folks who might not otherwise feel comfortable or be eligible working with formal institutions like Texas Department of Agriculture Star Fund, like the like FSA, or any of these other sort of bigger institutions. A strength was that it was led by people who are farming themselves. I think people really trusted us to be able to understand where they were coming from, and they really shared a lot of very personal information with us and trusted us with that. And that is incredibly humbling for me. So that was a strength of ours, and we understood kind of what the issues really were and what the needs were. We were flexible but not arbitrary in our granting mechanism. We had a strong equity commitment. It was really a big part of everything that we were doing. Our outreach expanded beyond just our network. So we were seeing where people were getting the information from, and it was really just a vast variety of from word of mouth to NRCS. It was pretty incredible. And we had a low overhead because of that low funding or low capacity funding. We were able to spend just about $2,000 in admin fees, which is really, really small. And like I said, we have a small pot of funds in preparation for the next disaster. So in the first round, we granted $121,500. And the second round, $36,500. That's a total of $158,000 to over 110 zip codes across Texas. And I think I've said enough that I really think that is all there's to say about this. Thanks for letting me monologue at you a little bit. And I think that we're going to pass it on over to Morgan to share about the work that they're doing over there.
Thank you so much, Carolina. That was just absolutely fantastic. I'm going to go ahead and screen share, and I just want everyone to let me know if you can see the presentation in its entirety or if I need to expand it into however you see a PowerPoint that's not just the entire PowerPoint. There we go. So my name is Morgan Ehmling. I am the Farm Viability Program Manager at Sustainable Food Center, and the majority of my work focuses around understanding kind of the barriers and challenges to small-scale farming in Central Texas, and now expanded out into the entire region of regions across Texas. The majority of my work involves kind of resource sharing, doing one-on-one consultations with farms, visiting them as part of the work that our farmers markets team does, as well as working through grant assistance and any other support that we can provide as farms work to improve both their farm businesses and their kind of ecological practices. I've been with SFC for almost 3 years now, and the work that the Farm Viability team is doing is some of our newer work. And this winter storm, it was my first intro into disaster relief for farmers, and I think also for the organization at large. So we worked quickly And I will definitely go into some of the challenges and successes that we had. But again, Carolina did a fantastic introduction to kind of the landscape of what was happening in mid-February. And I'll just go over a couple things. So the really great thing about my job and my work with SFC is that we are in almost constant contact with our network of farmers. Those who are active at the farmers markets are, we're talking on a weekly basis, if not more, more frequently. So immediately when the winter storm hit that Sunday, we had canceled the market the day before, knowing that the weather was going to potentially be dangerous to not just customers, crew, and staff, but to our farmers themselves, who were sometimes traveling 2+ hours. And I'm really thankful that all of the farmers markets in the area decided that, because I think it gave people a jump to be able to be on site and prevent some of the damages that we eventually saw that could not be prevented even with that little bit of extra time. We saw a time when, people were still having successful, profitable winter crop harvests and had also been planting for the spring and summer seasons and lost both of them at the same time, sometimes as high as 80% of their crop yield. Additionally, we saw animal loss across the ranchers in our network who we talked to, not just due to the freezing temperatures, but not being able to source hay or had water line damages. So as well, as having, animal loss that will then pervade through multiple seasons for them. Infrastructure damages were widespread. The power outages, as well as the freeze, caused overrides of cold storage. So people lost both the infrastructure of their freezers and the contents inside of them. High tunnel destruction from winds and snow, burst pipes, irrigation, lost power, both in their, work barns and in their homes. And so we saw tens of thousands of dollars, even on individual farms, in infrastructure damages. Additionally, not only were the farmers markets closed, restaurants closed, a lot of the physical kind of sales outlets, but we of course saw loss in potential revenue for time that needed to be spent to replant, to repair, to rebuild after the winter storm, as well as the time that was lost in actual market days that folks weren't able to attend and sell their goods. And then we additionally are still seeing impacts, 5 months later now, of for some of our fruit and nut producers who saw the freeze, but wouldn't eventually see the full extent of the damage of the storm for months until their summer harvests are ready. All that being said, we were able to very quickly check in with our network, to talk to farmers, to talk to ranchers, to see how they were doing. And of course, our initial thought when we were putting together our own relief fund at Sustainable Food Center was we don't know how much we're gonna make, and we don't necessarily know how far that money that we eventually did collect is gonna go. So we started to kind of formulate a strategy to not only provide direct monetary relief for the producers who we had continually been hearing, these are the damages on my farm, this is the damage to my future ability to sell. So we of course wanted to include that in our strategy. But as we began to make these partnerships with foundations and new funders, and eventually ran our own fundraising campaign, we decided to expand our strategies for relief to include both our farmers markets in a way that not only to physically rebuild farms and ranches, but to give them a place to come back to market, have a place to sell with no cost. So we were luckily able to cover annual fees and actually I should say weekly booth fees through this summer as part of our recovery strategy. So to not only support people rebuilding, but to move forward with their sales and ability to continue to build revenue for themselves. And then additionally, we were very focused on our own diversity, equity, and inclusion work, both at SFC and with some of our new partners who decided to have some dedicated funding to support our BIPOC farmers of color. So we created a relief and resiliency fund through separate funding that not only was, payments for rebuilding after the devastating effects of the winter storm on their farms, but also as kind of a project-based fund to mitigate against future disasters on their farms and invest in those properties. So I think if we're going to talk about some of the successes that SFC's model was able to employ, is the fact that we were so kind of already in the process of, working with foundation partners, writing grants, sourcing funding because of our nonprofit status that I was working, our development officers, our grant officers, program directors were all immediately, mobilized in these conversations with outside funding sources that though we did get almost $20,000 in this, fantastic outpouring of community donations that we received through our website and through some of our marketing channels, over 91% of our Winter Storm Fund at SFC was provided by foundation partners, both new and existing. And you can see here on the left our foundation partner list of some of our largest donors to that $210,000, and it was absolutely overwhelming. Each time we thought we were going to kind of compose a round of relief to our farmers or to budget for being able to maybe cover booth fees for a couple weeks, we just continue to get these overwhelmingly gracious, grants and funds from our new foundation partners. So we had all this funding now, and we were starting to figure out what are the ways in which we are going to mobilize these funds, get them out to our network, as well as understanding kind of the broader need of farmers across Texas, knowing that this was a natural disaster weather event that had such a far-reaching impact across all of Texas. So as I said in the beginning, we are very lucky because we have these very close relationships with all of our farmers who are already at our farmers market. So I remember being at my own house, no power, no water, I'm freezing, I'm wearing a million layers, and I'm calling up, our farmers at our markets just, in the day or two after the initial storm impact, just to see how they're doing. Do they have power? Not even understanding necessarily the impacts to their farm business yet, but to really check in with them on a personal level. And then beyond that, as we started to realize that our funds were going to be able to, be extended beyond just the 40 or so farmers and ranchers who are working with us on a regular basis, we really started to kind of formulate how we wanted to create that kind of expansive reach of the funds. So as part of my job within Farm Viability, I created this thing I call the Resource Network book. And it's really just this kind of all-encompassing database of mission-aligned nonprofits and coalitions across the state, other farmers markets. And when we got the go-ahead to extend our funding beyond just our own, market vendors, I really tapped into to those groups across the state. We were able to reach out to Grow Local South Texas down in Corpus Christi, Hope Farmers Markets, Urban Harvest in Houston, Pearl in San Antonio, the Dallas Farmers Markets, and then I think 4 or 5 Central Texas farmers markets, including SFC's own farmers market and Texas Farmers Market. We additionally, I just happened to be in a National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition call and was able to speak during that grassroots meeting. And was then connected with their grassroots fellow who had, after the storm, been receiving questions from farmers across Texas and even some parts of Louisiana as to how, what resources were available to them, how could NSAC be supporting them. And it ended up being a fantastic channel for NSAC to be able to direct folks in need down to SFC and get them connected with our own relief fund. Additionally, when we were actually doing the physical applications for farmers and for each of our different kind of strategies, we did a lot of social media sharing. We additionally printed flyers. We had our applications, as Carolina said, wanted to make it as accessible as possible, to have low to no barrier to apply for these funds. The ways that our questions, that we posed them in the application were very straightforward. It was literally name, where can we send the check, what is your expressed need in only a few words. And then of course, we also had our own priority kind of demographics of new and beginning farmers, farmers of color, as well as farmers who their families rely on farming as the majority of their household income. So those were our priority groups, and we had individuals sign up via QR code, via flyers, via Google Forms. We had some printed out. I had farmers physically hand me packages of printed out pictures, and have on multiple occasions worked with people one-on-one to fill out the applications. So we really tried to meet people where they were and make it as easy as possible to apply for these funds. That being said, when we first started doing the direct relief payments, we thought I think we had like maybe $12,000 that far. So we didn't know how far it would go. We didn't know if we were going to get any more than that, and ended up in round one giving $750 payments to 24 producers in our network. And as we started to build the SFC Community Donations Fund, as well as all of our foundation partner funds, we have since been able to do almost another $40,000 to 36 producers. And we are currently in the process for round 3 of our direct relief funding. And those have ranged from $750 to $2,000 to our producers. We've additionally since then been able to provide no-cost sales outlets to all of our participating agricultural vendors at the SFC farmers markets, both downtown and in Sunset Valley, as well as waiving their weekly booth fees. So in essence, any farmer who would like to come to a market is not paying for their annual fee or for their booth fee, and can then take 100% of the profit that they're selling at the market that day, without any fees. We additionally, as part of our outreach strategy, pushed this kind of offer to our lapsed vendors and vendors who might be doubled up with markets across Central Texas, or doubled down, to widen the impact of those fee waivers. And then our most recent success has been this fund that we created, the Farmers of Color Relief and Resiliency Fund, that through our partnerships with Legacy Collective and Methodist Healthcare Ministries, who both designated 50% of their funding to be reserved for farmers of color, we were able to give $72,000 to 12 producers of color across Texas. And their projects, as I mentioned a little earlier, covered not only the relief and the rebuilding due to the storm, but to really invest in projects covering, community, economy, environment, and their own financial businesses to mitigate against the effects that, as we know, a future disaster could and will happen, and so to mitigate against those effects. So just in a little summary, we've so far been able to reach 72 producers across Texas. We've had people all the way as east as the border of Louisiana and all the way south in the valley. We've so far given directly $164,900 in direct payments to farmers, and then additional funding that's been able to allow us to run no-cost farmers markets. These are just a couple quotes from some of the fantastic farmers that we've been able to support with these funds. I think it's a testament to the support that our foundation partners have given us in the wake of this disaster. And I think it is a testament to the ability for us to kind of coalesce both as a community, as a group of nonprofits, as people who are advocates for farmers and farmers themselves, that this is a necessary kind of group that needs to have support of of funds that aren't just after the fact, but as Carolina said, that they've been lucky enough to have this nest egg for the next thing that's going to happen. And of course, the hope of this group is that each of our entities and the groups and coalitions that we work with have skill sets that are really well suited to help portions of this work in disaster relief. And so I think one of the greatest strengths that SFC has had in this process was the kind of administrative organization, nonprofit infrastructure that made it possible for us to mobilize quickly, market things. We have a grant writer on staff. We have our finance team was able to be the ones to cut and mail all of the checks that we sent out. And it is something that I truly hope is incorporated into this kind of next iteration of what a Central Texas disaster relief farming collective would potentially look like. So I just wanted to thank everyone for their time today, and obviously thank all the farmers who have participated in this. And yeah, I think I'm turning it over to Eric now from Foodshed Investors.
Thank you, Morgan. I'm going to do the same thing. Head over to a screen share. And thank you all for joining us. My name is Eric De Valpine. I'm a partner at Foodshed Investors. Loosely, we started in 2016 to increase the supply of good, clean, fair food. We do that through advisory services, trying to provide funding and investing support to regional investors. But that has very little to do with sort of topic of the day, other than our experience in working with a lot of the organizations on this call. And so, like everyone in Texas, as individuals, we woke up on Monday and faced our own personal circumstances. And some people also had to think about farm, animals, crops, family, obviously. And so, there really was a dynamic of kind of the bottom falling out from under us. We applauded the various groups, the coalition that Carolina led and SFC and their fundraising efforts. But the real question, let's see, is this going to let me? There we go. So the question to us, as we started to think about emergency response and the topic today, was kind of the size of the problem. And, I think leading up in the week, we knew there was some weather going. And normally, if you think about emergency management, when you get to plan for it, you think about how do we mitigate, how do we prepare for response, and then what's the recovery look like. On Monday morning, I think a lot of us woke up to this situation. There had been very little mitigation except for what people had been able to do on farm. The basic infrastructure of the state, without sort of, broadening the topics here, but Roads, I'm from the Northeast. It's very typical to have trucks with salt and sand. I'm not advocating that for Texas. However, it's infrastructure planning and weather appropriate. Clearly, we were probably all impacted by the electricity grid. Preparedness, we'd heard weather reports, but I think a lot of people were still surprised. And I read today in doing some research about some other items that went on during this period that Texas A&M actually had activated a bunch of their trucks and infrastructure. They'd service something on the order of 3,000 people in their region, which is an amazing response, basically by staging their existing assets. But that's a drop in the bucket when we think about the state. So then when we woke up, we're caring for our family, ourselves, our home, wrapping pipes if you hadn't already. If you had livestock or crops, then you're proceeding to see what can we salvage and water the animals, feed the animals, make sure they're safe. Triage other on-farm damage. We heard countless stories, and a lot of people on this call lived through pipes bursting and other fence damage. We had at least one person who asked for money whose tractor had a weather-related disaster. And then people would try and support their neighbors. A lot of people that we speak to, their labor force is in their community, but to get to triage, they couldn't get to the farm. And so now you had a farmer who might have a farmer or rancher who might have a few employees in the area, but they're really down to themselves and their family. And then recovery. When are we going to get it? Where's it going to come from? Who's it going to come from? Is it money, supplies, or some other resource? And so these are all question marks. And I think as we are all here today, the underlying theme is to advocate for some sort of coalition and planning and infrastructure that we can do it better next time as we think about what we're going to face. So the fundraisings were launched fast, and that was incredible. Starting with the $50,000 goal of the coalition, amazing. Sustainable Food Center, I think, had more institutional infrastructure to reach out to foundations, also amazing. But still, no one knew how much small producers needed. And so we set out to try and answer that question in the middle weeks of February and kind of wrapping up end of February, early March. What we discovered in reaching out through these networks, we had 34 responses. The total dollar need, so our questions were, who are you? Where are you? What county or city? What type of operation? So crops, livestock, small, large, anything they wanted to use to describe it. How much money do you need and the top use of funds? And so these responses were predominantly, we had 700,000 plus identified cash needs, and self-estimates by the people who responded to us was 500,000 for seed and the labor to plant the seed. So we're not trying to recover lost revenue here. We're just trying to get stuff back in the ground so we can have a spring and or summer harvest. And so, that's pretty stunning. And you'll see that on this little map. I tried to articulate the counties we heard responses from. And, it's barely a drop in the bucket of Texas. The 34 respondents is obviously barely a drop in the bucket when you think about the number of small producers out there. So I don't think it's a big stretch to say $700,000 for the state of Texas is barely a drop in the bucket. This was confirmed when Texas A&M came out with a survey, and they identified. The caveat here is they identified $600 million in estimated lost revenues. That number has since increased. I've seen numbers, with $1 billion on the back end of it, as far as the total damage. But for today's context, I just want to say how very difficult it is to talk about raising and deploying $1 or $2 or $10 or $20,000 at a time, when the government, the state anyways, what they're hearing and talking about is citrus crops losing at least $230 million, dairy producers losing $8 million a day. So to get small producers on the radar of that kind of messaging is very, very difficult. And I think reinforces the idea that at a community level, at a coalition building level, at a collaborative level, it's really up to us to build an internal self-supporting system, similar to how I think a lot of people on this call understand the idea of building alternative food systems for local resiliency. I think this is very akin to that. So some of the challenges that we saw and have been talked about, there's no revolving loan fund to easily deploy emergency response funds. The funds first of availability to businesses versus individuals. It was a Herculean effort from the groups to raise $200,000, and then to have tax code sort of throttle that to, we can give you $1,000 if you say it's for rent, is a very difficult dynamic when, I'm going to hop back to this, but we had 33 respondents who needed up to $40,000. So receiving $1,000 or $2,000, it's amazing. It's great to receive money like that. But when it doesn't really move the needle, it helps, but it's not going to get them fully back on their feet. So the question in our mind is funding an existing group with a capacity to do this, or a collaboration of organizations that maybe dedicate a board member. I think one of the dynamics we've heard is some groups are basically 100% volunteer organizations, and then we've got nonprofits with paid staff. And so as we think about what this could look like as an evolutionary path to do it better the next time, these are some of the questions on our mind. Carolina mentioned trust, and I think Morgan did too. And I want to highlight something that we experienced when COVID hit and grocery store shelves dried up and infrastructure tightened up. The Office of Sustainability at the City of Austin put a call out and said we need creative ideas for food distribution. And so we responded in collaboration with the Sustainable Food Center with a proposal that the city ended up funding food purchases, and we worked with Common Market as well as some regional farmers. And the idea was basically the city would buy the food. We partnered with regional restaurants and food service businesses that had cold storage and dry storage infrastructure in place that was otherwise underutilized, and we wanted to utilize it and turn them into food distribution points. So that seems like that's easy. Well, it wasn't that easy when we reached out to some of these restaurants that we had no other relationship with, and basically said, we want to give you food, we want you to sell it to your community, and we want you to keep the proceeds so you can use that to keep your employees. And the idea that we're getting something for free and we don't need to give it back is, from a stranger, is very difficult hurdle to get over, even when people recognize the need. So how we build trust at every level of exploring this dynamic is another sort of piece that we're very interested in thinking about and encouraging everyone on this call to think about as we hopefully this prompts future conversations, whether it's collaborative, coalition, policy, what have you. So I'll leave that and I'll be kicking this over to Judith McGeary. And I just want to say that we've been through a number of things in the last 18 months. Judith is going to put some color on some more experience that she's had. But I enter this with the glass half full mindset. We know another kid is going to come. We know there's not going to just be one. We're reading today about once in a 100-year rain event in Germany, and their people are dying, and they're in a disaster situation right now. So we know this is going to come, and so with that knowledge, we can prepare. And that is it for me. I look forward to questions, and thank you very much.
Thanks, Eric. So my name is Judith McGeary. I'm the Executive Director and founder of the Farm and Ranch Freedom Alliance. My original background was both in law and in biology, and I got involved in sustainable agriculture about 20 years ago and founded FARFA 15 years ago. FARFA is farmer-led. I am a farmer. My husband and I have a small livestock and orchard farm here in Milam County, and our board are all either farmers or actively involved in sustainable agriculture. The majority are working farmers. And to provide some historical context, as Eric was sort of teeing me up for, the first disaster relief program for small farms that I was involved in was the 2011 drought. Since then, I've participated in relief efforts for Harvey in 2017, the flooding in East Texas in 2019, COVID relief in 2020, and now the Winter Storm Uri in 2021. And there have been a lot of disasters and crises in between, where our small farm community hasn't really had a coordinated relief effort. So my comments, I was part of the coalition that Carolina helped really put together on that, but I'm going to be talking through a lens of that specific effort, but all of these efforts, what I've learned really in this last decade of disaster relief in our state. The first one is that we do have to move fast when a disaster strikes. Carolina was right on the mark in getting our groups coordinating with each other and fundraising and putting word out that we would be there before the ice melted, literally. And also in getting the money back out quickly. People need support right away. And a relatively small amount of money, $500, $1,000, $2,000 at that very beginning moment can really have an outsized impact. Having said that, it's not enough. And I want to follow up on what Eric was saying. It's nowhere near enough for most of the farmers. When you look at the cost of replanting, clearing out whatever was destroyed, whether it was from the hurricane, from the flooding, from the freeze, the drought, and then finding a way to replant, get the crops back in the ground, get your animals back in shape, restock your hay. We went through all of the hay that was supposed to last us through the end of the summer in February, because that's what it took to keep our livestock alive through that storm. We need to get that hay, and we needed it right away. All of that kind of money, that's nothing that private philanthropy is really set up to do. That support is why we have government programs. And there are a lot of government programs out there. But first of all, our community particularly don't know what they need to do, and they struggle with it. They need to document everything. They need to get in line very quickly. So often what we found in all of these sorts of disasters is maybe somebody will call up the local USDA FSA office and be like, hey, are there relief funds for, fill in the blank, this latest issue? And the FSA officer will say, no, there aren't. Well, legally at that exact moment, there aren't funds, but there are funds coming. There will be funds available. And it will be a first come, first serve in many cases. So that person needs to say, where's your waiting list? How do I get in the line right then? Because if you wait to get in line until after FSA has sent out that announcement, said, oh yeah, now we have funds available, your chances of getting a portion of those funds has just dropped dramatically. So this is a little thing. The conventional farmers are used to this. They know that routine. Our farmers, FSA tells them they don't have funds, they go home. They figure there's nothing for them. How do you fill out that paperwork? How do you know which agency? If FSA tells you, no, you don't qualify, it's FEMA, go talk to FEMA. How do you know when to say no? I want the forms for X, Y, and Z program. Give them to me to fill out. I know that I at least may qualify for those forms. Where are they? Don't tell me just to go to FEMA. what does it take for our farmers to successfully work that? They need people they trust. First of all, it's hard to think in the middle of a crisis. It's when you are there, you have just spent the last week trying to keep your animals alive, or coming to grips with the fact that you've just lost your entire planting. It's hard to think clearly. It's hard to have the understanding and determination to say, no, I know we should qualify for this. I'm going to fill out these forms. You need to give them to me. Or what about X, Y, and Z program? A lot of our folks don't have that comfort level. So they need people they can trust and tell them how to do it, what they do qualify for, where to go, how to manage it. That's, you know, and we need more of that. I'll get, sorry, I started to go to something else, and let me flip back and take that later. I do want to start for a moment with what we have. So we do what we have going for us. We have experience. I'm not the only person in the state who's been involved in more than one disaster relief effort. And so we have a growing community of folks who sadly know this routine by now, and we have gotten it to a routine. When we first started out, our application and review process was very difficult. For both the applicants and for the people doing the reviews. We've winnowed that down. We've learned what we have to have for the IRS. You know, like we've gotten a lot greater clarity on like what is necessary, and we've really streamlined it. We also have a wonderful set of organizations that each have their own ties into different geographic areas and different communities. For many years, the sustainable movement, ag movement, was very much an Austin movement. And it's still, you know, Austin is a stronghold, and there are great groups, and there's incredible depth of expertise in a lot of different ways in Austin. But what we have is the sustainable ag movement is no longer just about Central Texas. We have sustainable producers and the organizations who have ties with them all over this state now. So we had you know, the Small Farmers and Ranchers CBO, which is statewide, but heavily East Texas. We had Hope for Small Farmers down in South Texas. We had, of course, the Central Texas groups. We had Grow North Texas. We really were able to cover it. We brought in a little bit La Semilla. They were there in West Texas. They simply weren't hit as hard by the freeze. So for this effort, La Semilla wasn't as deeply involved. When it was COVID relief, La Semilla was much more involved because it was more, you know, it wasn't a weather event that mostly had skipped the western portion of the state. So, and then when we have ties up into the Panhandle as well. We have this geographic and community, people that have those connections. We also have growing connections between the organizations. So FARFA, one of the things we've been doing for a while, our main work is policy work. And so we have a regular call. It varies between bi-monthly or monthly, depending on how much is happening, with a lot of these same groups. And so it's not disaster relief, it has nothing to do with disaster relief, but we have this ongoing working together relationship. More groups are coming and engaging in our statewide conference that FARFA and Small Producers Initiative hosts. And we have various groups that write each other into their grant proposals. So we work with each other on a programmatic level. And all of this builds these connections so that when we are in the middle of a crisis, we're able to call on each other very effectively and very quickly. Almost all of the groups I just mentioned, though, lack capacity. They are farmer-led, farmer-run, much like what I was saying about FARFA. Which is, again, a strength. This is what enables us to really know what's happening for our producers, and really enables the producers to trust us because they know that we're living their experience. But it also means, as I think has already been said, that we ourselves can get caught up in the disasters. And even more, really, it means that we're generally under-resourced. Farmer-led groups aren't the best at working family foundations and foundation money and grant writing and the rest of it. it's just not a strength. And I say that I'm trying to get better, and everybody I know is trying to get better, but we tend to be very thinly resourced and very thinly staffed. And that's just the nature of farmer-led groups for the most part. And this ties to, this undercuts our ability to be effective, not only in a crisis, but actually where I think a greater need is right now, which is the proactive work. As Eric said, we know there's going to be crisis after crisis. The climate is not getting better. We are going to face more of these weather extreme events. What we need is how to help farmers take steps in between the crises to improve their resilience to these disasters. You can't completely, something like this is going to kill your crops. It is. But there are many disasters which can be buffered based on your farming methods, and also help them understand all of these resources and be ready so that it's not during the storm that they're trying to have that phone call with me and go, oh my God, what do I need to do to access USDA's disaster relief? They already know that, they have that resource. So for instance, at our conference next month, this is the Southern Family Farmers and Food Systems Conference down at Texas State University, we're holding a full day pre-conference workshop on resilience. And it's going to cover like everything on resilience, or as much as you can in one day, on personal and family resilience, how to deal with divorce or death, how do you do goal setting for a family farm. It will also cover how do you farm resiliently. We have a farmer working on this who went through Hurricane Harvey with no damage to his crops because of the way he farms. He got 51 inches of rain in 2 days and his farm came through just fine. You know, we need more farmers using methods like his, so he'll be teaching that. And we'll have people teaching the attendees about the government safety nets, disaster relief, what they can do now before the next disaster hits, and what do they do when the next disaster hits. We need to be doing this regularly. We need to be hosting workshops like that, outreach work like that regularly, but where do we get the funding for it? That is, you know, the ongoing challenge of finding the funding to proactively build that. We also need to be looking at policy and systems change. So again, it shouldn't all be coming from our nonprofits or private philanthropy. This is too big of an issue. This is food security, it's climate change, it is ensuring that we are able to feed our communities. And by the way, resilient, regenerative agriculture can help mitigate climate change. So we need to be providing all the support for farmers to be shifting to regenerative methods. So FARFA brought a bill last session. We worked with legislators to bring SB 1118 during the regular session, and it passed. And it's a great new program over at the State Soil and Water Conservation Board to provide outreach and education and funding for farmers to change to regenerative methods, although that word is not used in the bill for political reasons. But there's a little catch. There's no funding for it. We are reasonably confident that the Soil and Water Conservation Board will be able to pull down federal funds to make that program a reality. We've talked with them at length. They were on board with taking that approach, that they think they can get that federal funding, because we all understood that coming out of the gate, the odds of passing that bill with state funding were non-existent. But it's a weakness. It's a weakness that we don't have state funding for that program. We don't have support for regenerative agriculture from Texas Department of Agriculture, TDA, very much not providing support, except for a few niche areas. And that's work that needs to change at the policy level. We need to be able to build our strength on policy, go back to the legislature, get funding for that new Soil and Water Conservation Board program, get directives to TDA to provide greater support for regenerative ag, to help us build the resilience of our farmers. Because I'll go back briefly to that list that I sort of went through. If you'll notice, it started in 2011 with the drought. And then there was a sort of semi-calm few years. Don't get me wrong, farming in Texas is never easy. It is not an easy place to farm, but there weren't big disasters. And now we're seeing one pretty much yearly. There's Harvey, there's the East Texas floods. Okay, COVID wasn't natural. There was Winter Storm Uri, but that's every other year, 2017, 2019, 2021. Major natural disasters that hit farmers in a significant portion of our state, if not the entire state. This is not slowing down, it is speeding up. And so we've got to help our farmers on a proactive way. The last thing I wanted to bring up also that ties to both this, where policy work needs to come in, and something Eric was saying, I think, about the program that they were involved with, where they were buying up produce. The city bought up produce and then gave it to the restaurants to sell during COVID relief. There were a lot of food relief efforts after the freeze. People who had lost all the food in their houses, they might still not have water or electricity. So there was a huge amount of food relief efforts. We got one call, just one, from someone saying, how do we connect the local farmers? Do your local farmers have anything left? And we want to get it to give them money. We want to pay the farmers. We're not asking them to donate, so that they can have funds to help rebuild and then use that local food to feed the people who need it. And it was wonderful. It came from a Representative Hinojosa in Austin. And I worked with her and her staff, and we found the farmers that had stuff that they'd been able to harvest they had the cold storage. So they harvested pre-freeze, got it put away. They had the food to sell. Hinojosa arranged for funding, bought it and distributed it at one of their distribution sites. It was fantastic. High quality, healthy food going into a food relief effort, providing financial relief to the farmers on a fair basis. And it was the only one I know like that. And it was difficult to make it work. She'd reached out to several groups who were unable to make it work. We had to do it. Our farmers worked with us on a trust basis. And I know that word has come up multiple times, but I don't think it can be underestimated. Our farmers trusted that when I went to them and said, okay, we're working on a tight time schedule. We've got 12 hours to pull this together. What do you have? What would it cost? And will you simply deliver it and trust that you are going to get repaid for this? We don't have the funds this second, not here. You will get your money. You can trust, this will happen. And they trusted us. They trusted FARFA. And I had a strong enough relationship with the legislators to trust that that was going to be followed through on. When you're dealing with a crisis, when you're dealing with the time crunch, those trust relationships are invaluable. We need more of them, and we need the broader support so that the government policies, the government support, the programs that are meant to address, major disasters can be funneled through our, farmer-led organizations that have those relationships with the different communities. Because I can also say this, had I been trying to do that in Black farming community in East Texas, they wouldn't have trusted me. They would trust, Phil Ross from Texas Small Farmers and Ranchers CBF. Same thing down in the Valley. Maybe that I haven't built up a strong enough relationship there, but Diana Padilla from Hope has. This is where working with those locally based organizations is vital. And we have to look for ways to support that and build the capacity there, and with these at each level of the different organizations to really have a robust system. And so with that, I think Ken was going to try to save us some time for question and answer, perhaps.
Yeah, let's do some questions and answers. There is a chat room available, so you guys can post them there. And I've got a couple questions that would like to ask you guys. So we heard a lot about all the things that small producers run into as obstacles. Do you know of anything that small producers have as a resource that they can use to their advantage in these times? That, in other words, is there anything that they actually possess by being small and being nimble that larger producers don't have at these moments?
I'd say my thought would be it's less size per se and more diversification. What our farmers have going for them, for the most part, is they don't have all of their eggs in one basket. If one crop gets wiped out, they've got time to replant. Even if they've lost most of that season, there's the next season. The farmers I know that got hit hardest in some ways are, for instance, the citrus farmers in the valley, where that's what they've got. And when that citrus got hit, they're screwed.
Yeah, I'll add that it really depends on the disaster, right? Because like with COVID, when small farmers lost their restaurant sales, but gained all of this interest in direct-to-consumer sales, there was the ability to pivot sort of quickly. I don't know that really applies as much to this event, and not just because of the freeze. I mean, a freeze happens very frequently in February in Texas, even though it sort of depends on the year. But this was a complete systems collapse, and there's really not much that anyone can do to prepare for your state having having completely screwed you, to be frank, by not being part of a larger grid and not having other sort of preparations made, or even announcing it to the state that this was something that was coming. And so I don't know that there's a good answer. I think it really depends on I think it depends on the event, frankly.
All right. I haven't got anything coming up in the chat, so if folks are out there, you've got a question, please do pose it. So you guys, you hit a lot of points on things that need to be done. Do you see any single item that needs to be addressed as a critical change for these future events that are going to happen? Because as Judith said, these are going to happen no matter what, right? We know these are going to happen. There's likely going to be another COVID event in our lifetime of some kind, right? But we are going to run into drought. Texas always has drought. We're going to have hurricane, always have hurricane. The weird thing is right now I will not say we have too much rain, but we have an unseasonably wet period right now, which is great, actually. But there's those things that can happen, and cold, if you're watching the weather, if the high pressure zone that sits on Texas begins to shift because the jet stream has shifted, because the Arctic has gotten warmer, well, we may be back, we may be in a southern deep freeze kind of setting every winter, right? Or not something quite as extreme, but something colder. So what do you see out there that we could do that would be sort of a really big moment of change to help address these things? And it might be something that enables us to address them all individually rather than it addresses them by itself individually. Does that make sense? Yeah,
I think I would just like to double down on what Judith said and understanding the investments that have to be made in regenerative agriculture, not just in its kind of mitigation abilities for the environment, and to just like kind of collapse that into one small thing is like not real. There's the advocacy, there's the policy, there's the infrastructure investments that would have to go into that. But truly understanding it from at farming as an agricultural practice, we will have to eventually understand the actions that will have to happen to combat climate change as we move forward, with the food system impacts that will continue to worsen and become more frequent and more severe if we just leave it the way it is.
Yeah, I follow Morgan and agree with everything she just said 100%. But I'd add, I think that, it's been the message of regenerative ag for a long time that soil health and these improvements can have profound effects, and it falls on deaf ears. And so I'll posit a situation. What if the freeze happened before COVID? What would have happened to our regional supply chains? The benefits that the small producers received when COVID hit, and really some of them had some of their best year even on losing our restaurant clients. We all had food on our table after a little system shock because of our local and regional producers. So let's just imagine that our local and regional producers got wiped out, which is what happened. And then COVID hit and we had a national systemic shock. We would be in dire straits. You wouldn't just be reading on the news about run on toilet paper, right? And so I think that's a terrifying situation. And so one, I would say that establishing some sort of organization that can lead and have an emergency relief fund, have the conversation with some of these foundations now where it's, even if it's not funded, it's committed capital, meaning they say the next time this happens, all you need to do is pick up the phone and we're ready to write a check. We know you'll do it well. We trust you. Again, there's that trust.
One of the things that I've seen, one of the things that you guys have pointed out is there was a 600 million to 700,000, relationship. I don't perceive that as being correct. There are over 200,000 small producers in the state. If they're producing $25,000 in gross sales, I'm not saying that that's net revenue. That's $5 billion or more. And Eric, you can do the math. I'm not a math person. You can run that, but that's a lot of money, and that is a big deal. And so, with that, is there a way that small producers, these are farmers, there's no way to develop a unified approach. We all know that. Farmers are very independent. But is there a way that the state can recognize the value of this huge economic engine that is not centralized? It's very decentralized. How do we get that? Because that seems like one of the bigger issues as well.
I'll jump in and acknowledge that a number of us have 6 p.m. commitments and we're closing in on that. And so, Ken, I think, in my opinion, that we hear the term lobbyist, and so it's the large conventional farmers that are corporate farmers that have the ear of the legislature, and then it is small groups. And hats off to Judith for running at this for years. But small organizations trying to move the needle and get the ear of the legislature. So having data like that, and actually maybe really trying to value how much is the 200,000 small producers, what is the value of that market and how many jobs, et cetera, really becomes useful information on multiple points. And one of them would be, hey, it's a meaningful driver to the economy. The other piece is that need side. When we say, if this falls apart, here's, when you don't know how much money you need, and an organization, whether it's a foundation or a company, says, I'll give you $25,000, you're like, holy cow, that's a lot of money. This is awesome. But that same organization, if you can say, we need $350,000 for X, Y, and Z, they might just as easily write that same check because the needs are articulated. There is a question on the panel board about crop insurance, and maybe Judith is probably better qualified to take it, but she needs to hop off. Small producers have a very, very hard time being able to qualify for whole crop insurance because it's not set up, the program is not set up for small diversified producers. And so, they get just a fraction if they qualify for it.
I'm afraid I have to leave. My apologies. Thank you all for a great conversation.
And thank you guys. I think we're to call it at 6 o'clock anyway. So thank you all for being here. Thank you all for attending, and hopefully we can figure out answers and do better next time.
Thank you all. Have a good night.
Thank you.